Hello. Hello and welcome to this webinar on non-native species in Anguilla and some of the impressive work that is being undertaken by partners in Anguilla to mitigate and resolve some of the issues around non-native species. Today we've got from the Government of Anguilla, Mr. Ron Connor, Zoya Buckmeyer and Nyasha Child, and from the Anguilla National Trust, Farah Makeda. So we've got three presentations today, looking at different aspects of non-native species. And without further ado, I will hand over to Ron to introduce some of the issues that are being dealt with.
Okay, let me just get started right here.
Whilst you're doing that, I should just perhaps mention this webinar is being automatically recorded, just so everyone's knows that. And any questions, I'd be very grateful if they can be put into the chat, and then we will have all the presentations and deal with the questions after those.
Okay, great. So can you hold one quick second for me, please?
Sure.
Good morning. My apologies about that. My director was just indicating that she needed to get on to the webinar. All right, can everyone see my screen?
We can't see a share. We can see you, Ron.
Pardon me?
We can't see your PowerPoint.
Oh wow. Okay, 1 second. Let me try to do that again. 1 minute, please. I'm not certain. Let me see. Okay, I think this is it now. All right, can everyone see it now? Okay.
Yes, that's visible. That's visible. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, good. One second, I'm having some technical difficulty. My apologies for this. Okay, good. All right, good. All set now. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us with this webinar as we are celebrating Invasive Species Week throughout the UK overseas territories. But I know in the UK for sure, and Anguilla also joins in that. So without any further ado, I would go straight into my presentation. My presentation is entitled Alien Invasive Species in Anguilla, an investigation into their origin and habitats. My name is Ron Connor, and I'm an officer with the Department of Natural Resources in Anguilla, Department of Natural Resources, as mentioned. So just to start off by giving a quick overview in terms of the context of Anguilla's location from a global context. As you know that Anguilla is basically right to the west of West Africa, and also basically Central America, east of Central America. Also, if you can look at it in that context, you notice our location from North America and South America. From a Caribbean context, we are very close to the island of St. Martin, just about a 7-minute flight, 15 to 20-minute boat rides. Anguilla has approximately, well, the mainland itself is Anguilla, and also we have about 14 satellite keys, all of them being uninhabited. So start off by giving a brief background for those who do not know anything about Anguilla. We are located at 18.1 degrees north, 63.2 degrees west. We are the most northerly of the Leeward Islands. We are a British colony since 1650. The new term is British Overseas Territory. We have about 35 square miles and a population of approximately 15,000. Before I get full into the presentation, I would just like to know that we do have a few endemics, and I have highlighted 4 of them here. The very first picture being the Antillean iguana, which is native to Anguilla, and some of the other what we call Anguilla banks. So Antigua, Saba, Statia, etc. would have this particular iguana. We also have a native snake, which is the Anguilla racer snake. We have a few endemic species I've highlighted here, one being the black lizard, and the other one being a plant known as Rondeletia anguillensis, which is actually, I think, belongs to the coffee family, if I have that correct. So we know that no place is immune to alien species, and by virtue of that, invasive species, definitely some of them will go on to become major threats as invasive. And from that context, we know that invasive species basically forms a major threat to both plant and animal life, especially on small islands. It can be extremely difficult, extremely severe, impactful on small islands. So in Anguilla's context, we know that basically the Global Invasive Species Database lists Anguilla with approximately 239 alien species. In 2007, Joint Nature Conservation Committee did, basically listed it as having 212 alien species. I would continue straight into just to give an overview of some of the invasive species, common invasive species that we have in Anguilla. Giant African snail, vervet monkey, the list goes on. We have the tropical bull nettle being some plants. We have fire ants. We have puncture vine. We have something called yellow dad. And of course, we have some feral cats. So just to name a few. In terms of invasive species, we know that, again, as people move throughout the island, people move from country to country, whether some species are embedded within their luggage, hidden in their luggage, transfer as pets, also in machinery, whether or not they're transporting the cars or they're bringing other basically heavy equipment operate with them. Whatever it is they are transporting throughout this world, invasive species will be a major issue. And of course, being they can enter deliberately, accidentally, through the natural process. But looking at Anguilla again, we know that we have 3 major ports of entry. So the area that invasives would first come in, just to give an overview of that context there, would be the airport, which is mainly for passengers. And, we have an international airport. At the moment, we have one direct flight, one international flight, so to speak, which is actually from the USA, in Miami. That flight comes in twice a day. Apart from that, we just have more or less private jets and other small charter planes bringing people in throughout the region. The Blind Point Ferry Terminal is also another one of our main ports of entry, quite a number. As a matter of fact, more people come to the Blind Point port. It's the main port of entry for passengers. So you would find St. Martin being a depot, quite a number of persons would travel to St. Martin and catch the ferry across and come over to Anguilla. And of course, we have a cargo port down in Sandy Ground, which is another port of entry, mainly for containers, small cruisers and yachts. So going on to invasive species again, we know that the major threat with them, basically they can outcompete native and endemic species. Just to highlight a few, they can, create a hybridization, sterilization of native species. They can introduce pathogens. And especially, on small islands, that can be a major impact as well on our ecosystems, on our health system, as well as, agriculture. So quite a number of ways in which they can impact us. However, I want to focus quickly on the invasive species in Anguilla, just to highlight a few of them. So we have the giant African snail, which is native to East Africa. That snail actually entered Anguilla just around 1999 to about 2004. No one really can give the exact time period that it really entered, because we know that once an invasive, especially on the initial stage of an invasive entrant, it takes a while. There's some sort of lag period before it actually grow exponentially. But in about 2004, late 2004, 2005 is when people started noticing these snails on the island. Basically came in, we do not know the exact method, but it could be accidental, whether it was through containers, whether it was hidden in cargo, whether it was in plants. But there were also some reports of persons being accused of deliberately importing it for food, because we know there's a escargot that's quite a delicacy in some, especially in the French territories. So it was also claimed by some people. Actually, some people stated that it was actually deliberately introduced, but that is to be determined. The habitat are basically around homes are close. They like to be around damp areas and cool areas. So this is quite an issue as we speak. Well, back in 2005, and I actually did my study on this particular species, 2005, the population, I mean, it was just out of control. And over a period of time, it seemed it kind of dwindled down. So right now, during the rainy season, you might see one or two, but it's not like in abundance as you would have seen it throughout the entire island. The picture here basically shows how the snail is, the impact of the snail on one farmer. On a daily basis, he goes around around his crops and remove hundreds of snails from affecting his crops. He does that on a daily basis. So, but apart from that, the Department of Agriculture they tried to initially attempt to eradicate. They initially tried to eradicate the snails back in 2005, 2006, and they spent about $100,000 Eastern Caribbean currency trying to do that. The other impact here from the giant African snail shows the impact on someone's house. This is under the eave of the house, whereby the snails climb up and they drop their feces. So basically impacting. This is extremely hard to get rid of. You would have to either power wash it, because sweeping it with a broom doesn't really do the job. And of course, the impact, you have to also repaint your house. So that's another financial impact there. The Cuban tree frog, also another critter to us, really. Native to Cuba, Cayman Islands, Bahamas. Introduced around the 1990s thereabout, but around 1995 to 1999 is when a lot of people more or less started noticing the giant African snail, the Cuban tree frog throughout the island. The means of entry, again, is considered to be accidental in containers, basically containers bringing in plants for the hotels. One of the key things one of the issues that we have in Anguilla is that once a container arrives in Anguilla, it goes directly, after clearing customs, it goes directly to the site, so the particular hotel. So basically, the invasive is within that particular container. It can be distributed almost at any site throughout the island. Okay, and the frogs also, the habitat is basically around damp areas. They actually go down, they climb on the top of people's roofs and go down into the cisterns through the down spouts, and that in itself is another financial. It contaminates the water, so that in itself is another issue, as the water has to be dumped or get rid of. Also, the green iguana, basically introduced around 1995. It's considered to be accidental. It was actually found on logs of wood in the sea, actually, that washed up along the shoreline. This was after Hurricane Lewis in 1995. So this particular species has gone out of control, and in terms of the numbers, and it's a major threat to Anguilla. We have one, as mentioned earlier, native iguana, which is the local Antillean iguana. But the invasive green iguana has caused a major problem to us, so much so that the National Trust coordinated an effort to move the local iguana, capture many of them, and put them to one of the offshore keys just to safeguard them. And of course, we have the lionfish, which came around 2010. It was accidental. It's considered to be accidental invasion again. Actually, the lionfish quickly, if I can speak quickly on it, was introduced in 1992 in Florida. And this is where we believe the introduction of it come to the rest of the Caribbean islands. After Hurricane 1992, Andrew broke a seaquarium, damaged a seaquarium. They escaped into the ocean, and through the ocean currents, movement of the ocean currents, and along with them swimming, they eventually reached to the Caribbean islands. So Anguilla would have first recorded the lionfish around 2010. And of course, the impact from them is that they stay around the reef system. They like structures, so they stay around the reef system, and they basically eat a lot of those reef fish that are essential for us in terms of trying to the reef fish, more or less, apart from the ecotourism aspect of it. They are there to clean the reefs and keep the reefs in check from algae and other things. So this is sorry, let me slow down. The lionfish actually eats a lot of those fish, and therefore that can cause the reefs to experience severe problems or die out. And
Ron,
the last one I want to speak about.
Ron, can I just jump in with a 1-minute warning for you, please?
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, and I'm right on target. So the last one I want to speak about really is the vervet monkey, which was introduced in Anguilla around the 1990s. This is considered to be deliberate. It was introduced as a pet. It has been since then. We believe it has been smuggled to the island as well. Again, now Hurricane Lewis of 1995 caused the destruction of that containment, and a couple of them got away. So the population is now increasing, and hopefully we'll be able to control it sooner or later. Okay, and with that in mind, these are the two species I'm going to allow my other colleague who's going to speak next to discuss them. But these are just some invasive species that we are currently dealing with: the puncture vine, Yerba porosa, tropical bull nettle, and about 2 others. And just to kind of wrap up, we are continuously trying to monitor and manage invasive species in Anguilla through a partnership approach. And that is through the OECS, which is the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Joint Nature Conservation Committee, also the Non-native Species Secretariat, as well as some local counterparts like the Anguilla National Trust. And of course, through Darwin Project, we have been able to get several funds throughout the years to work on that. So we continue to do our best to distribute information, booklets, do educational awareness, and updating our legislation, all in an effort to manage our invasive species. And I would just like to leave this 15 second, if James would allow me, just to play this 15-second video, whereby I call it snack time. Here's an invasive monkey having basically eating soursop. It's right under this tree, if anybody can see it, under the tree eating a soursop that someone was so patiently waiting on to mature. Okay, so with that in mind, I thank you very much, and I know questions will come, so we'll answer those questions at the appropriate time. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all a pleasant day.
Thank you, Ron. That was great. Zoya, over to you, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. I think I can share. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Zoya Buckmeyer. I am the field coordinator for the Invasive Plant Project. I don't know if you can see my shirt. And I'll just be presenting a bit about the progress that we've made towards managing invasive plants in Anguilla. So Ron gave a bit of an overview. I know Farah from the National Trust will talk about their work. So to give you an idea of what we've done with the plants so far. And before I start, I would like to point out that our project is hosted and based within the Department of Natural Resources. We are funded by Darwin Plus. So this work would not be possible without Darwin Plus, but also with our partners, the Non-native Species Secretariat, our host for today, and Durham University. So we would not be able to do any of this work without our funders and our partners. By way of outline, my presentation will just give you an overview of our plant project, tell you a bit about the progress we've made so far in mapping and eradication, and then some of the challenges we faced and what's next for the project and past the end of the project. So some background, the official very long name of our project is Protecting Anguilla's Biodiversity by Building Capacity in Invasive Plant Management. And the three main parts of that are really important, of course. We care about biodiversity, which is why we're managing invasive plants. But building capacity is really key because the issue with projects is that sometimes projects happen in isolation and there's no continuity between projects. And so it's really important to us to build local capacity so that even after the project has ended, the momentum is kept and that the work keeps going. If you would like to get a bit more information about the project, our code is C+125, and you can find a lot of information on the Darwin Plus website. The project started officially in October 2021, and we recently got a 6-month extension, so we will be ending in March 2025. So about a 3.5-year project in total. We've had a lot of objectives for the project, but overall, we have decided to focus on 5 species that I'll give you a bit more information on in a minute. But for those 5 species, to date, we have mapped the distribution of those species across Anguilla and across, we've surveyed the offshore keys that Ron mentioned with the help of the National Trust. Thankfully, none of our 5 species are on the offshore keys. So we are focusing our efforts on mainland Anguilla for now. We've targeted one of those species for eradication or control, and we have been doing ongoing monitoring and herbicide treatments. And then to tell you a bit about the pillars of the project, we have a program of learning by doing and skill sharing. So I came into the project with not much invasive experience, just plant experience, and I've learned a lot. And we're also, as we say, building local capacity. So that's a really important part and pillar of the project. We are creating a system for invasive plant monitoring so that the Department of Natural Resources can continue this work. We are aiming to eradicate one of the species to improve biosecurity on the island to prevent the reintroduction of more invasive plants, building public awareness as well. So those are the kind of pillars of the project. As I mentioned and Ron mentioned, the project focuses on 5 focal species. These were identified through stakeholder consultation back in 2018 and 2020. So they looked at all of the invasive plants and decided not necessarily those that were worse off, but those that were in a stage of invasion where it might be worth trying to tackle them or control them. So these were plants that had relatively recently arrived, had relatively small populations based on the data they had back then, and they decided we should try to focus on this 5. Of course, as you'll see in a minute with the maps that I'll show you, some of them are very widespread. And so in doing the data and doing the surveys over the last 3 years of the project, we've realized some of these species are much more widely distributed than we initially thought. So we are not trying to control them, but we are aiming to eradicate one, and I'll tell you more about that species. So first off, in alphabetical order, we have the Brazilian jasmine. This is a beautiful ornamental vine that is related to other jasmines. It smells really nice, so a lot of people plant it for its beautiful white flowers and its smell. However, it is a very prolific vine, and it also spreads by producing berries that birds eat and spread around. So it's very widespread. We have only been tracking this species for about a year, but so far we've found over 40 populations, and it's mostly concentrated in the center of Anguilla, as you can see here, but we found some outliers as well. So we're still in the process of looking for this species and trying to see where all it is. Next is the false puncture vine. This is a vine that is said to have medicinal uses for like headaches and constipation and nervous disorders. But it is a vine that grows along the ground. It looks a lot like Sleeping Beauty or Mimosa pudica. And it has these spikes that sticks to shoes, tires, animals, and it's very easy to transport because of that. So it's very, very widespread. There are 90 observations we've had so far all across the island, especially along the roadsides, because it tends to stick to tires and be transported that way. Next is the Madagascar rubber vine. This is a plant that should be familiar to a lot of us because it is an ornamental plant. You've probably seen it in someone's yard or someone's garden or even hotels. It's spread in a lot of ways, including by wind, because people spread it, and also through pruning because it spreads vegetatively. So if you cut piece, it propagates very easily. So this one is mostly concentrated in areas where it has been planted, but because it is so easy to spread, it has spread outside of those intentional plantings. So this is fairly widespread across the island of Anguilla as well. Next, we have the tropical bull nettle. This is a very large shrub that can grow up to, I want to say about 8 feet tall. And it looks very similar to the castor oil plant, which a lot of us should know what that looks like. Castor oil or physic nut or bellyache bush, depending on what you call it where you're from. But it has a very important difference in that it is covered in spikes from top to bottom. Every single part of this plant, except the flowers, have spikes. So the seeds, the stems, the leaves, everything is covered in stinging spines, which can cause really bad irritation if you get into contact with it. And it can cause a rash for up to 2 weeks, we've heard from some people. So it's a fairly dangerous plant. Luckily, it has a very small population, only in about 3 places we found it so far. So that makes it a good candidate for control. And our last species is Yerba porosa. It is a very soft-stemmed herb that is sometimes used in cooking. So in some parts of the world, especially in Central America, they use the leaves as seasoning, and the seed pods can also be used as seasoning. They smell really nice. But as far as we know, no one in Anguilla is using it as yet. So that's something that maybe we can work on sensitizing the public so that they can use it. Because as you can see, it is very widespread. We have over 150 observations, and it's probably the most widespread species within this project. Not as widespread as wild moses, but it is the most widespread one that's included under this project. So of these 5 species, and based on everything I've told you so far, you've probably guessed that we have decided to control the tropical bull nettle based on the threat that it poses to humans and the fact that it has a relatively small population. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the progress that we've made towards eradication of this species. So the species was first identified in 2020. And at the time, I think they found the same 3 populations that we've seen now were identified back then. And they were very large patches, but they seemed fairly isolated. Because of this limited distribution and because of the human health impacts that I talked about, we decided this would be a good candidate species for eradication. So we thought, is eradication possible? What exactly do we need to make that decision? Of course, we needed data. We did a lot of data collection. We did a lot of surveys. Our surveys are ongoing, where we check basically the entire island for any of the 5 plants. But once we found the tropical bull nettle, we made a point to walk around the site and establish the boundaries of the site and see where all of the plants are and what the size of the different populations are. And in total, we found about 200 square meters across those 3 sites. Next, we use a program called Weed Search to evaluate the feasibility of eradicating this species. And this is just a plugin in Excel, basically, that allows you to input different information about the life history of the species, how it reproduces, how it spreads, and how long it lives, as well as inputs for management, as you can see here. And in return, this model will tell you how long it would theoretically take to eradicate the species and how much it would cost. So our feasibility results showed us that it would be possible to eradicate the species from the mainland of Anguilla in about 6 years, not all of which is active management, about 3 years of active management, and at a cost of about $47,000. So we decided based on these results, it's doable. The results are also likely to change because we're recalculating as we go, as we get more information. And so we decided it is worth it. We're going to try to go forward with this eradication. One of the outputs from this process has also been a management plan that I'm developing with the consultant, the technical expert on the project. And it was very important for us to do this because when we first started the project and we reached out to international listservs and so on, and we asked, has anyone dealt with this plant? What have you done so that we're not starting from scratch? No one was able to tell us what they had done, and no one had tackled the species and written it down. So it was really important to us to document the process as we went so that we can then share what we've learned, and the next person who wants to deal with the species doesn't have to start from scratch. So we do have a management plan that will be available. We're constantly updating it, so there will be multiple versions. But if you're interested and you have this plant, you want to get rid of it, please reach out. We'd be happy to share this management plan. We started our treatment in November 2023. We're using 2 different chemicals. We're using Roundup, which is glyphosate, and Garland, which is triclopoester. And we are using those based on the size of the plant. We have sprayed about 1,400 plants to date, and it's looking fairly promising. So from these very bright, big, vibrant plants to this. And so we're hopeful. It's looking good so far. I'm going to just show a tiny clip of these drone shots from our largest site. This site was about 1,500 square meters, so it was the biggest one by far, and has a very concentrated clumps of bull nettle. And as you can see, all of this dark green in the middle and along the edges is bull nettle. And this video was taken in October of last year, right before we started treatment. And then by comparison, this video was taken in February after the first spraying. So we had a significant amount of die-off, almost about 95%. And we're hopeful that if we keep this rate of efficiency up, that the plants will be eradicated in the places that we found it. So in the process, as I said, eradication would be possible over 6 years. We're doing chemical treatment with herbicides, and we're currently at this stage of the process where we're assessing our treatment and applying what we've learned to make sure that we're improving our process. And that is adaptive management, as you might know. So the first step, of course, is to plan our treatment. We decided what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. We've had 3 treatments to date in November, February, and 2 weeks ago in May. And we're assessing our success and efficiency. We're currently at about a 97% average control efficiency of the 1,400 plants that we sprayed. And we are just applying what we've learned into the next round of treatment. So to wrap up, we have had several challenges in the project. I joined just over a year ago in April, and the project started in October 2021. So there was a bit of a delay in really getting started with project outputs because we were lacking the staff that we needed. So now that we are here, we have a full team of 4, and we've really hit the ground running in the last year, and we're trying to make up for lost time, basically. In terms of next steps for the projects, we will be, we have developed an invasive plant monitoring plan that we hope will be taken up by the department for continued surveys. We will have continuous evaluation throughout the process. And in October of this year, we are planning a regional lessons learned workshop where we bring in other invasive, especially plant practitioners from the other UK overseas territories to share what they've learned so that we can share what we've learned and we can learn to collaborate together. We are hoping to really improve biosecurity on island to prevent the risk of reinvasion and of new introductions. And there's another project that hopefully will be taking up some of that, some of the onus to improve biosecurity, especially at the ports. We're continued public awareness. Of course, this week is part of our awareness week, so continued public awareness. We will develop an invasive plant strategy that provides kind of an overarching program of work so that individual projects fit into the larger picture. And then, of course, identifying what's next on the priority list, what else should be tackled so that the work is continuous and we keep this momentum. So this is just a schedule of kind of what we've had going on this week for Invasive Species Week.
So I'm going to give you a 30-second warning, I'm afraid.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. After the webinar today, we have an exhibition tomorrow. So if anyone is watching from Anguilla, we hope to see you at the People's Market tomorrow between 10 and 2. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoya. That was great. Loads of information there and quite a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to invite Farah to put her presentation up. We haven't got an enormous amount of time, Farah, but we should have 11 minutes for you, which was scheduled. So please fire away.
All right, I'm just loading up the presentation now. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen. So hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having us here today. So this presentation focuses on one of our major program areas, conservation and protection of habitats and species, and more specifically on the restoration of those habitats for the benefit of species. So Anguilla's offshore keys are hotspots for biodiversity. They're important bird and biodiversity areas as well as key biodiversity areas. And over the last 12 years, in collaboration with national and international partners, we've been working to restore these islands, to increase their resilience to climate change and to protect the incredible species that call these really special places home. So our first restoration project actually focused on Dog Island. It's a 205-hectare privately owned island where over a period of 6 months between November 2011 and April 2012, with the permission of landowners and in collaboration with the then Department of Environment, Fauna and Flora, Wildlife Management International, and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, we successfully removed black rats to ease pressure on native biodiversity, including seabirds, lizards, sea turtles, and plants. And then building on this success, the A&T once again partnered with the Department of Fisheries this time, Fauna and Flora, Wildlife Management, Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, and the RSPB. And again, with the permission of the landowners, we were able to restore prickly pear keys. So in 2018, we successfully removed invasive brown rats from prickly pear east and west, thereby creating a sanctuary for reintroduced lesser Antillean iguanas that Ron had mentioned, as well as regionally important populations of seabirds, one of Anguilla's largest expanses of endangered lignum vitae trees, as well as other native plants and animals. And then our organizations once again focused our attention to Anguilla's most remote offshore key, Sombrero Island, where we successfully removed mice over a period of approximately 2 months between July and August 2021. And that was especially for the benefit of critically endangered endemic Sombrero ground lizards, a potentially endemic tree lizard, regionally important populations of seabirds, and it also enables and supports the recovery of the island's highly impacted vegetation. So this brings us to where we are now. And while we know that Anguilla's offshore keys are incredibly important for biodiversity, the Anguilla mainland also has important biodiversity that could similarly benefit from restoration initiatives. But complete eradications of invasives across the entire mainland would be extremely difficult and very expensive. But it is entirely possible to remove them from smaller enclosed spaces. So when we were considering replicating our restoration work on the Anguilla mainland, one of our first thoughts was a Fountain National Park. So covering just over 5 acres of land, or 5 hectares, of land, Fountain offered the perfect location to try a habitat and species restoration program because of its existing protected area status, its size, and its biodiversity, which includes stands of critically endangered Anguilla bush that Ron also mentioned during his presentation. So beyond its ecological importance, it's also one of the Lesser Antilles' most important heritage sites, with Fountain Cavern having been used by the Taino Amerindians as a site of worship 600 to 1400 years ago. So this particular project, funded by Darwin Plus, but also with additional funding from the John Ellerman Foundation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ani Private Resorts, Fauna and Flora, Rewild, and then in partnership with Fauna and Flora, the Government of Anguilla, Wildlife Management, Rewild, and Birds Caribbean. This project focuses on transforming Fountain into the UKOT's first mainland island. So what's a mainland island? Essentially, it's an area cornered off with a pest-resistant, storm-proof fence that creates a safe, secure, protected area for wildlife. But it's also supposed to be a place for people. So it represents an opportunity to show Anguillians and visitors to Anguilla the work that we've been doing on the offshore keys and bringing that work closer to home, and to essentially showcase Anguilla's incredible natural and cultural heritage, creating a space where people can come to learn, appreciate, and immerse themselves in Anguilla's nature and history. So since the launch of the project, which started in April 2022, what have we actually accomplished? So one of our first actions was establishing an ecological baseline by conducting biodiversity assessments, focusing on terrestrial birds, ground and tree lizards, bats, insects, and plants. And then beyond our baseline, in February 2023, we were fortunate enough to secure funding from the John Ellerman Foundation and Ani Private Resorts to secure an additional half-acre parcel of land to add to the mainland island. And then in April last year, we held a management planning workshop with a wide range of stakeholders. So this workshop directly informed the Fountain National Park Management Plan, which has been drafted and is currently under review. And then the next phase of the project, which ran from July to October 2023, was the actual construction of the mainland island fence. So the phase had two main components. The first was the clearing of the perimeter of the park, where the fence would be constructed. And in order to ensure that the fence is in fact pest-proof, we needed to reduce risk and entry pathways. So we cleared paths about 4 meters in width where the fence was to be constructed. And then clearing of the perimeter was followed by actual fence construction. So the fencing material is almost entirely stainless steel. It's an incredibly fine mesh. It's almost like chainmail with only a 5 millimeter mesh spacing. And it's the first time a fence has been constructed completely using stainless steel. So there was a bit of a learning curve. The team from Wildlife Management was able to join us on island to show the local fence construction team how to space the support poles, how to hang and secure the mesh at the right height, how to install a bottom flashing to prevent invasives from climbing up onto the mesh, and how to fit a hood over the top of the fence to prevent any invasives that might have been able to make it onto the mesh from climbing up and then actually getting over the fence and into the protected area. So the fence itself is 1.8 meters tall, which is the required height to keep cats out. And then once the fence was constructed, we had tracks cut throughout the park to enable invasive species eradication work. So trying to work with the landscape and without causing too much disturbance, 12 tracks were cut in an east-west direction, with each track about 20 meters apart from each other. And then with the park enclosed and with the tracks cut, we started our invasive species removal work, first targeting green iguanas, livestock, cats, dogs, and monkeys. So with the help of volunteers, we've monitored the site once or twice a week. In addition to walking through the tracks and the perimeter, we also set up a couple of trail cameras along the perimeter to see if any of these animals would try to find their own way out. We didn't record the presence of any of these invasive species until mid-March of this year, when we found a single common green iguana close to the fence on the northern bound. We weren't able to actually capture it, but we haven't observed it since. But we're continuing to use the camera system, and we're still monitoring the entire site and to search for it. But there is the chance that the iguana actually did climb out and escape, as the fence is really supposed to keep animals out rather than necessarily keeping them in. And then following the track cutting and similar to our offshore key rodent eradication initiatives, we established a grid system in October to guide our eradication work. So it took wildlife management less than a day to actually establish the bait points, with points being placed on a 20 by 20 meter grid, as well as every 10 meters along the fence's perimeter. So that came to a total of 135 bait points. And then monitoring stations were also established at each bait point, as well as between each bait point, for a total of 212 monitoring points. So baiting took place between the 15th of March and the 29th of April, with bait being checked 2 to 3 times a week by A&T staff and volunteers, and then replaced when it was eaten by rodents or taken by non-target species or damaged by weather. And we used claret vertificum-based bait. And the last sign of bait was on the 26th of April at one point along the fence's perimeter. And baiting was coupled with intensive monitoring, which ran for 47 days from the 5th of April to the 21st of May. So for monitoring, we used trail cameras as well as flavored wax blocks. And over the last 2 weeks, we had actually been using a different type of non-toxic monitoring tool that wildlife management was able to secure for us. The monitoring tool is called DTEX, and it contains a fluorescent marker which glows under UV light. So after eating DTEX, the fluorescent marker shows up in the rodent's urine. So you can shine a black light over the monitoring area to see if rodents have been around as they're constantly peeing. So we literally just successfully completed the rodent eradication just this last Tuesday with the removal of all of the wax monitoring blocks and the DTEX. So in terms of next steps for the project, we'll be focusing our efforts on ongoing biosecurity, especially watching out for green iguanas, controlling chickens and invasive plants, as well as reintroducing native and endangered species with priority species, including the Anguilla bank racer, which is a type of snake, and the Anguilla bank skink, and the Lignum vitae tree. We also want to focus on creating an enjoyable and informative visitor experience. So we'll be identifying trails or tracks that we would like to keep open, designing signage, and working with the Anguilla Tourist Board to promote the park as a cultural and natural tourism site. And so that's where we are now. We still have about 10 months left of the project, but it's really just the beginning of our national park management journey. So with our experiences on the offshore keys and the transformations that we've been fortunate enough to witness there, we're similarly looking forward to seeing and documenting how Fountain and its habitat and its species recover through the management interventions that we're applying. So that's actually it for my presentation. So I'll pass it back to you, James.
Well, Farah, thank you very much for that. This has been a really interesting series of presentations. It's great to see the work in Anguilla showcased, both on the plant side and the island restoration side. There's been some remarkable achievements made. We are fractionally over time, but given the worthiness of the content of this webinar, I'm going to push it for a couple of minutes and see if there's any more questions. Now, I've been trying to keep on top of questions in the chat, and I've done my best to answer them, but there are a couple which I would appreciate your inputs on. And perhaps Ron might be well placed to clarify if you have any rapid response plans or contingency plans in place for new invasives arriving in Anguilla. Do we have sound?
Oh, I think he just answered it in the chat.
You're on mute, Ron.
Thanks, James. Yes, sorry about that. I was trying to answer that question the same time that you actually asked about it, because I found it in the chat. So in terms of a rapid response plan, we do have an invasive management strategy in place. And Our effort is, I mean, we are trying our best to see how we can implement it as we go, you know, as invasive species pop up throughout the island. I mean, dealing with invasives in general, we're trying to see how best we can implement it. In many occasions, we actually have lack of some of the resources. But in terms of that question as rapid response plans, yes, based on the species that comes in, we would immediately take that action once we found out that a particular species has been introduced to the island. The question was about after a disaster. That in itself, you know, it takes a while before we actually find out what that species was, if anything was introduced. But again, we do make a conscientious effort to see how best we can address the matter.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. And a good questions come in. Perhaps one for Zoya. Has the project investigated less toxic methods for management? Oh, you've just replied to it. So.
But I will add, so of course, if you can avoid chemicals, it's great to avoid chemicals. Because of the nature of the bull nettle and the fact that it's covered in spines, the risk to the team outweighed the benefit of doing that versus using herbicides. So we decided to use herbicides as the most efficient method to control this particular plant. But of course, using our protective equipment, using best practices, diluting to the right concentrations, and trying to do everything we can to minimize the risk of the herbicides that we're using every so often.
Thank you, Zoya. And if I understand correctly, you're using triclopyr, which is a very safe active ingredient to have in a herbicide as well. Oh,
yes, and glyphosate.
Yep.
But the concentrations of glyphosate are like 3%. So.
Okay, that's great. And one from Joe. Was there any public objection to the predator fencing, Farah?
No, none at all, actually. So we were quite pleased.
Okay.
And it's not, I mean, it doesn't look horrible either. I think people might think it's like a massive fence that's just looks ugly, but it actually, you can see right through it. And it probably looks a lot better than what was there before, which was just a lot of probably invasive non-native plants along the perimeter of the perimeter of the park.
If I could join Farah, I think it look aesthetically pleasing.
Oh, thanks, Ron.
Yes, I've seen many less aesthetically pleasing fences than your predator fence, Farah. So, and perhaps if there's no more questions coming in, I'm just going to round it off on with one question from myself about the building on that point about the public reaction to non-native species, and Ron or Farah, what's the public perception of non-native species, and how's your work received?
Ron, I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, well, we have quite a lot of outcry from the public with reference to invasive species, you know, especially the Cuban tree frog, the giant African snail, but more importantly, so the vervet monkey, which is a major issue at the moment, and we are getting calls about them, persons reporting them on a continuous basis. And at the moment, we are trying to see how best we can address the matter. So one, get a population estimate in terms of the size, and two, come up with the best practices possible to manage them. Eradication would be ideal because we do have a law in Anguilla basically said that no monkeys are allowed to be imported in Anguilla. And, you know, like you mentioned, the monkeys in question, you know, they were imported many years ago, and for whatever reason, I don't know why they wasn't dealt with back then. But that's a question that's beyond my control. Yeah. Laura?
Yeah, I agree. I think most people are supportive of the work that we're doing, especially if the invasives or non-natives are actually affecting them and their livelihoods. So those are the easier species to address. In terms of the National Trust, a lot of our work has been on the offshore keys. which almost all of which are privately owned. So we have been fortunate enough to receive permission to conduct the work that we do. And so we assume that they also see value in restoring these sites for the benefit of native biodiversity.
Ron, thank you very much for addressing that important point, and thank you to all of you for your presentations today. This has been really interesting. I have definitely pushed the envelope on the time today, but I'm glad we did, because it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, and I will look forward to working with you in the future. Take care. Thanks to all our participants, and do bear in mind this will be posted online. The webinar will be posted online. Thank you very much.
James. Thanks for all
Take
who
care.
participated.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.